Qin or Shi. Most people assume the most evil Qin emperor is Qin Shi Huang, the man who unified China, built the Great Wall, and buried an army of terracotta soldiers. They're wrong. It was his son who actually destroyed everything. Qin or Shi inherited the world's first unified Chinese empire at around 20 years old, and collapsed it in roughly 3 years. Acting entirely under the influence of the eunuch Zhao Gao, he had at least 12 of his own brothers executed in the marketplace, according to Sima Qian's Shiji, with some accounts placing the sibling death toll even higher. He doubled the forced labor quotas on a population already exhausted from building his father's tomb complex, a project drawing on an estimated 700,000 conscripted workers. Zhao Gao's control over him was so complete that when the eunuch pointed at a deer and called it a horse in open court, any official who disagreed was quietly removed. By the time rebellions ignited across the empire, Qin or Shi had already gutted every general and minister capable of stopping them. Zhao Gao forced him to commit suicide in 207 BC. He was around 23 years old. The dynasty his father spent a lifetime building outlasted him by about 4 months. Han Wudi. Han Wudi ruled for 54 years, and is celebrated as one of the greatest emperors in Chinese history, which makes what happened in 91 BC harder to explain away. The Jinugu persecution, sparked by accusations of witchcraft being used against the emperor, consumed the capital in a wave of executions that the Hanshu records as killing tens of thousands of people. His own crown prince, Liu Ju, was accused of orchestrating the magic rituals. Rather than face certain death, Liu Ju raised a desperate armed uprising inside Chang'an itself, failed, and died. Emperor Wudi later acknowledged the accusation had been fabricated. He never reversed a single execution. His endless military campaigns against the Xiongnu, while strategically significant, drained the treasury and the population simultaneously, with contemporary records suggesting catastrophic demographic decline by the end of his reign. Near death, he issued the Luntai Edict, a rare imperial self-criticism admitting the suffering he had caused. It is one of the only times a Chinese emperor formally admitted he was wrong. It did not bring anyone back. Wang Mang. Wang Mang usurped the Han throne in 9 AD and is sometimes described by modern historians as a visionary reformer ahead of his time. That framing conveniently skips over the millions who died because of him. His overnight nationalization of all land, abolishing private ownership in a single edict, caused immediate agricultural collapse, since farmers had no legal basis to work fields they had cultivated for generations. He reformed the currency so many times in such rapid succession, some accounts suggest multiple changes within a single year, that commerce became functionally impossible and ordinary people's savings evaporated. Then in 11 AD, the Yellow River breached its banks catastrophically, partly due to neglected infrastructure, flooding vast stretches of farmland and triggering the famine that ignited the Red Eyebrow Rebellion. When rebels finally closed in on his capital, Wang Mang reportedly sat in his palace conducting ritual ceremonies. He was killed by a mob in 23 AD. According to the Hou Hanshu, his head was displayed publicly for years afterward, and reportedly used as a drinking vessel. Whether or not that final detail is true, nobody seems to have objected. Cao Cao. Cao Cao never formally called himself emperor during his lifetime, though the Wei dynasty he built gave him the posthumous title Emperor Wu of Wei, so he qualifies. He was also a gifted poet, a brilliant strategist, and an efficient administrator, which is what makes the Shu province massacre of 193 AD so impossible to dismiss as simple battlefield brutality. According to the Sengguoji, Cao Cao's forces killed hundreds of thousands of civilians in Shu province in revenge for the murder of his father, with bodies reportedly choking the Xi River. He also executed Kong Rong, a direct descendant of Confucius and one of the most respected literary figures of the era, along with Kong Rong's entire family, including his young children. The quote most associated with him, roughly translated as "I would rather betray the world than let the world betray me," is widely attributed to him, though its exact source in primary texts is debated. Brilliant, methodical, and entirely willing to massacre a province over a personal grievance. The poetry was genuinely good. Emperor Hui of Jin. Emperor Hui of Jin, personal name Sima Zhang, may be the only emperor on this list whose evil was almost entirely passive. He was, by most historical accounts, severely intellectually disabled and completely incapable of governing. When informed that peasants were starving because they had no rice, he reportedly asked, according to the Jinshu, why they didn't simply eat meat porridge instead. That line predates Marie Antoinette's alleged cake comment by over 1,000 years. His incapacity handed real power to a succession of relatives, triggering the War of the Eight Princes from 291 to 306 AD, a 16-year civil war fought entirely over who got to control this one helpless man. Estimates of military deaths exceed 500,000, and the accompanying famines likely killed millions of civilians. Hui was captured, lost and recaptured by different factions multiple times, passed between armies like furniture. His reign directly enabled the uprising of the Five Barbarians and the permanent fragmentation of northern China. He died in 307 AD, possibly by poisoning. The empire died with him in everything but name. Emperor Tai Wu of Northern Wei. Emperor Tai Wu of Northern Wei, personal name Tuoba Tao, unified northern China after the chaos of the 16 Kingdoms period, and then launched something China had never seen before, a systematic state-sponsored campaign to eradicate an entire religion. In 446 AD, after discovering weapons and alcohol stored in a Buddhist monastery, he issued edicts ordering the destruction of all monasteries across his empire, the burning of Buddhist scriptures, and the execution of monks. The Weishu records the scale is enormous, with tens of thousands of monks reportedly killed, though Buddhist sources recording the persecution likely had rhetorical reasons to emphasize its severity. The weapons and alcohol discovery may have been genuine, or may have been a pretext for an ideology Tai Wu already held. His military campaigns against the Xiongnu and Ruran confederacies were described in contemporary sources as leaving entire regions effectively depopulated. He was assassinated in 452 AD by his own eunuch Zhong Ai, who then murdered the next emperor as well before finally being executed himself. Even his death came with a sequel. Emperor Yang of Sui. Emperor Yang of Sui may have killed more people as a percentage of China's total population than almost any other ruler in history, and he did it while building one of the most impressive infrastructure projects the ancient world had ever seen. The Grand Canal, completed around 610 AD, drew on an estimated 5 to 6 million conscripted laborers, with death rates among workers described in the Suishu and Ziji Tongjian as catastrophic. He then launched 3 consecutive invasions of Goguryeo between 612 and 614 AD, the first of which mobilized over 1 million soldiers, and ended in a defeat so total that reports suggest over 300,000 men never returned. He allegedly murdered his own father, Emperor Wen, to take the throne in 604 AD, though this claim appears in Qin Dynasty sources that had political motivation to delegitimize their predecessors, so treat it as probable rather than certain. By 618 AD, the empire was in open rebellion, and Emperor Yang was feasting in Jiangdu, refusing to return north. His own bodyguard captain strangled him. The Tang dynasty that replaced him inherited a country that needed a generation to recover. Emperor Xuanzong of Tang, late reigned. Emperor Xuanzong's first 4 decades on the throne produced the High Tang, arguably the peak of Chinese civilization, a golden era of poetry, trade, and cultural flourishing. Then he fell completely in love with Yang Guifei, withdrew from governance, promoted her relatives to positions they were unqualified for, and ignored repeated warnings about a general named An Lushan, who was accumulating dangerous power on the northern frontier. When An Lushan rebelled in 755 AD, it triggered one of the deadliest civil wars in recorded human history. Tang census records, as analyzed from the Tang Shu, show the registered population dropping by roughly 2/3 between 755 and 763 AD, with historian estimates of total deaths ranging from 13 to 36 million people, though the methodology behind these figures remains debated. Xuanzong fled Chang'an as rebels approached. His own guards mutinied at Maowei Station and strangled Yang Guifei in front of him, blaming her for everything. He returned to the capital a broken man, abdicated to his son, and spent his final years under effective house arrest. He reportedly kept a portrait of Yang Guifei and looked at it often. 40 million people may have died. He looked at the portrait. Emperor Zhuangzong of later Tang. Emperor Zhuangzong of later Tang, personal name Li Kungshu, is a case study in a man perfectly designed for war and catastrophically unsuited for everything that comes after. He unified northern China through genuine military brilliance, then celebrated by handing the actual work of governance to eunuchs and theatrical performers, while legitimate officials were humiliated, ignored, or driven out. He taxed an already devastated population heavily to fund personal entertainments. In 926 AD, barely 3 years into his reign, a military mutiny ignited. Zhuangzong personally led a countercharge with a handful of men, was struck by an arrow, and died. According to Ouyang Shu's Shin Wudaishi, his performers piled his body with theatrical instruments and burned it as an improvised funeral pyre. He had ruled for approximately 926 days. The later Tang limped on for a few more years without him, then collapsed too. He conquered an empire and spent it on theater tickets. Emperor Huizong of Song. Emperor Huizong of Song is one of the finest artists in Chinese imperial history. His calligraphy style, known as slender gold, is still studied today. He assembled the largest imperial art collection China had ever seen. He also lost northern China, his throne, his son, roughly 14,000 members of his court, and his freedom, all in a single catastrophe that he spent decades setting up. The Jingkong incident of 1127 AD saw the Jurchen Qin Dynasty capture Huizong, his son Emperor Qinzong, and virtually the entire Song imperial court in one sweep, marching them north as prisoners while Huizong's extravagant garden complexes burned behind them. The 1120 AD alliance conducted on the sea, in which Huizong partnered with the Jin to destroy the Liao dynasty, had simply handed the Jin a clear path south once the Liao was gone. Huizong died in Jin captivity in 1135 AD, still writing poetry. The poems survive and are considered beautiful. The northern half of China did not come back for 150 years. Tohan Timur of Yuan. Togan Timur, the last Yuan emperor, reigned from 1333 to 1370 AD, and presided over a convergence of catastrophes so complete it is almost difficult to separate what he caused from what simply happened to him. The Yellow River catastrophically changed course in the 1340s, flooding on a scale that killed hundreds of thousands. The conscripted labor mobilized to manage the resulting repairs became so brutal that it directly sparked the Red Turban Rebellion of 1351, according to the Yuanxi. The Black Death moved along Mongol trade routes through Yuan China during this same period, with demographic historians estimating China lost somewhere between 30 and 50% of its population across this era, though establishing pre-Yuan baselines makes precision difficult. Ming Dynasty sources describe Togan Timur spending increasing resources on esoteric Tibetan Buddhist rituals during this period, though those sources had obvious political motivation to delegitimize their predecessors, so treat the details with appropriate skepticism. When Zhu Yuanzhang's rebel forces approached Beijing in 1368, Togan Timur abandoned the city without serious resistance and rode north into Mongolia. He died there in 1370. He was the first Yuan emperor born in China and the last one to rule it. The Wanli Emperor. The Wanli Emperor of the Ming Dynasty, personal name Zhu Yijun, achieved something no other emperor in Chinese history is recorded as managing. He simply stopped showing up for work for approximately 28 years. From roughly 1589 onward, he refused to attend court, refused to fill official vacancies, and refused to read or respond to administrative memorials. According to the Mingxi, entire provinces went without functioning governors because he would not authorize appointments. The government did not stop. Exactly. It just slowly hollowed out. At the same time, he was financing the three great campaigns between 1592 and 1600, three simultaneous and enormously costly wars that drained the treasury his brilliant first minister Zhang Zhuzheng had spent a decade rebuilding. When Zhang Zhuzheng died, Wanli stripped his family of all property, and according to the Mingxi, had several family members effectively starved to death, revenge for the strict discipline of Wanli's childhood. He never met the Manchu threat building in the north. His grandson's dynasty fell to it in 1644, 24 years after Wanli's death. Historians frequently identify his reign as the point where Ming collapse became structurally inevitable. The Qianlong Emperor. The Qianlong Emperor reigned from 1735 to 1796 AD, presided over the peak of Qing territorial expansion, and is celebrated in Chinese historiography as one of the dynasty's great rulers. He also oversaw what is likely the most extensive literary censorship operation in human history, the Siku Quanshu Project, running from 1772 to 1793 AD and framed as a grand collection of all Chinese literature, was simultaneously used to identify, alter, and destroy texts deemed politically threatening, with historian R. Kent Guy's scholarship estimating over 3,000 titles permanently destroyed or altered. His military campaigns in Xinjiang between 1755 and 1758 AD targeted the Dzungar Oirat people with a ferocity that historians including Peter Perdue have described as genocide, with estimates of 500,000 to 800,000 deaths, and some sources suggesting 80% of the Dzungar population was eliminated. His absolute personal trust in the official Hessian allowed Hessian to build the largest known corruption network in Qing history. When Hessian was arrested after Qianlong's death, a King era audit estimated his personal wealth at roughly 15 years of imperial tax revenue. In 1793, he dismissed the McCartney mission, informing King George III that China had no need of foreign goods. The Opium War followed 46 years later. Yuan Shikai. Yuan Shikai is technically the last person to declare himself Emperor of China, holding that title for exactly 83 days across the winter of 1915 to 1916, before every province revolted simultaneously, and he rescinded the claim. He had spent the preceding years systematically dismantling the republic that replaced the Qing, dissolving parliament, and having political rivals removed. Song Jiaoren, a prominent Republican politician, was assassinated in March 1913 in a killing that contemporary evidence strongly implicated Yuan's government in, though direct proof was never formally established. Most damaging of all, in 1915, Yuan accepted the majority of Japan's 21 demands, a treaty that would have reduced China to a Japanese protectorate, in exchange for Japanese diplomatic recognition of his imperial title. He rescinded the emperorship in March 1916 under the pressure of total political collapse. He died of kidney failure on June 6, 1916, 3 months later. The warlord era that followed, which consumed China in fragmentation and violence for decades and arguably set the conditions for everything that came after, is his most durable legacy. He put on an imperial robe, wore it for 83 days, and left the country worse than he found it in every direction. If you want to see more, click the video on screen now.